Welcome back to Up, the podcast by Creative Repute, where creativity, strategy, community, and purpose meet. My name is Kristina Hernandez, and I'm the co-host.
Happy to have you all here. My name is Nile Livingston, and I'm the founder of Creative Repute and also a host of the Up podcast.
Here, we explore the stories behind the work, the people behind the ideas, and the partnerships that help meaningful brands, organizations, and communities grow. Each episode brings you conversations with leaders, creatives, founders, educators, organizers, and changemakers who are building with intention and moving ideas forward. This is Creative Repute. This is Up. Let's jump into the conversation.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Unmistakable Podcast by Creative Repute. I'm joined by my co-host, Kristina Hernandez. And today we're joined by Dr. Kimberly McGlonn. Thanks so much for joining us.
Hey, everybody. Happy to be here.
So I feel like you've been famous in Philadelphia. I've known about you so many years before I actually had a chance to meet you. Your marketing team was working on overtime.
I'll let them know. That's the perception.
But before I want to get into your background and your history, but before I dive in, I want to take something I learned from your book and ask you, what's something that you're most excited about right now?
You know, I think that question is so, it's like to the day for me, like sometimes even to the moment. So one of the things that's sitting top of my heart is my daughter is going to announce, I'm going to announce tomorrow, but she's decided today that what school she's going to for college. So we just got back from a trip to Texas, to UT Austin, and got a chance to see the film program there, and she's decided on LSU. So that feels really super exciting to me.
That is exciting.
Yeah, she wanted to be in Los Angeles, and I'm actually really glad that she's not going to be in Hollywood quite yet.
Yeah, so she wants to study film or...
Yeah, she wants to study film. Yeah, she wants to make feature-length narrative films.
Mm-hmm. So is she working on film now? Like just in high school for fun? Oh, great.
She does it for fun. Sometimes, we've been doing this annual girls trip since she was about 5. And until she was about 13, she never knew where we were going. We would just get to the airport, and then it would be like figuring out from the screen, guessing where we were going. And then we started kind of co-planning it together. And since we've been traveling abroad, she started telling these really beautiful shorts about what she's like observing and how she's making sense of who she is and the world and life. And so that's what she's submitted to film schools. And I'm super excited.
That's amazing.
That's exciting for me right now.
Yeah, I went to Syndicate when I was younger. Oh. Yeah. So I think just having that knowledge of, there's so many aspects to film, lighting, sound, environment. Yeah, there's a lot to consider. So
And she wants to be a director. So she's always thinking about all of those things. So yeah. I'm really, right now I'm feeling very excited about the fact that she feels safe enough to want to be a creative and that she identifies as a creative, which I think is a really rare privilege for a lot of girls, particularly girls of color, particularly Black girls. So I'm excited that she feels comfortable enough to design a life that way.
Well, thinking about being on a path of development in childhood, I'd love to learn more about your background and how it led to where you are today. Mm-hmm. So, born and raised in Milwaukee. You went to school just a couple years after the schools were desegregated, which is telling of the times that we're in and how much progress we have to go. Mm-hmm. Your father was a boxing coach, correct? Mm-hmm. Your mother, seamstress?
My mother was early in my childhood, she worked in the post office. She was a postal worker, and my grandmother was a seamstress. So you're tracking. You got the maternal line together.
Yeah, that's amazing. So I know that you grew up in a middle-class household on Grant Blvd, and your family unit started to fall apart, and that put you into the world on a path of just learning so many lessons. You're still ushered through the education system by mentors and teachers. You traveled the world. You were a teacher yourself for a while. You opened up Grant Blvd. Can you tell us in your own words just a little bit of background for folks that haven't already been introduced to you before?
Let's see. Yeah, I was born in Milwaukee.
Yes.
It's an interesting place, an interesting way of understanding America and its challenges and its potential. In the moment that I was in Milwaukee as a girl, it was very much so a time when I think there was a lot of appetite for what PBS was creating around content and figures like Mr. Rogers and shows like Fraggle Rock and Sesame Street and Punky Brewster and The Cosby Show. So there was this real strong energy, I think, particularly in the Midwest, in Milwaukee, which is a blue collar space that was certainly challenged by residential segregation, to figure out what meaningful integration might look like for us. Mm-hmm. And so I went to a neighborhood school that afforded me and all of my peers and some of who are continue to be some of my closer friends an opportunity to be in each other's homes, like to really be familiar with each other in intimate ways. Mm-hmm. And I think because there was such an open door policy, it created an opportunity for us to really be with each other in the messiness of life. Mm-hmm. And that, I think, particularly for me, but I think for all of us, it produced a symphony of languages. You know, when you spend quality time with people who are Catholic and who are First Nation and who are, you know, Mexican, you get a little bit of what it means to just be in all of those environments. And I think that that's actually what ends up being the superpower for people who aspire to I don't want to say even leadership, just like quality living, right? I think quality living for me is about meaningful connection. And the best connections are rooted in an ability to breathe in your body, no matter what room you're in. Mm-hmm. And so Milwaukee afforded me that. And even as my family was collapsing, you know, one of the things I share in that book, Grant Blvd, is how my mother, who did so, how she fell into a really deep depression. And in that, she decided that the best thing for her to do was to exit our family unit. And my father, who tried to really hold us down, he found a lot of comfort in some really early exposures in that moment to cocaine. Mm-hmm. And that took him away. So he was a working addict, but he was generally absent. And so in that gap, there were this beautiful orchestra of women from a variety of walks of life who's had some spiritual capacity to see and hold me in that absence. And so that safety net that emerged set me off into college. And so I went to LSU mm-hmm. and found myself in Louisiana in the late 90s, early 2000s, and learned a lot about America from a different story. So yeah, I was raised in Milwaukee, but I like to think I grew up in the South. Yeah. I spent 8 years in Louisiana, and yeah, so that all of that was like what in Louisiana we would call the root of who I became and who I am as a woman now.
Amazing. Well, let's show folks your book. If you can grab that off the stoop next to you.
This is the one.
Yes, you've been so vulnerable in this book, sharing lessons learned, not just in your personal everyday life, but also when it came to business. Mm-hmm. Can you talk a little bit about what inspired you to start your first business?
You had this perched up here so nicely. Yeah, I mean, it was sitting. Okay.
You gotta open it up.
Okay,
there we go.
Yeah. The book, I do think, was about an effort to be honest about my observations about life and, you know, what it means to self-actualize. Okay. And then what pursuing business as a force for good, you know, and leveraging those lessons in service of humanity was what I aspired to do with that first company, which Grant Blvd was that project. I started it in 2017. It became the first Black-led B Corp in North America in the fashion space in 2020. And it was really committed to sustainable design. So thinking about the planet and my like real affection for the natural world. Mm-hmm. And how I thought that design could be used as a force for creating living wage work for women whose lives have been impacted by the criminal system. So it was just like an intersectional design approach. Mm-hmm. And it was so hard, you know, like there was at a time when we were just starting to have shared language about sustainability. We were just starting to have some courage around mass incarceration and the ways in which it affects all of us, disproportionately some of us. And I wanted to sit at that intersection of a solution that I thought could be a model for how all of us thought about how we design our companies. And so the book and Grant Blvd is really a longer toolkit, like a longer form toolkit for how we can tap into the things that sometimes have caused us the most hurt and how we can move towards that darkness and how once we push through it on the other side, there really is an opportunity for us to offer something that is a force of like just the light, which is, you know, just deep radical care for, you know, the people and the places and the persons that we've been as we, you know, just seek to show up.
Yeah, I can tell that you put people first. You traveled the world and you also poured those experiences into Grant Blvd. Can you talk a little bit about, well, Kristina, you prioritize marketing.
Okay.
Can you talk a little bit about what you learned from marketing? You talked about how your target audience was younger Black girls, but the price point wasn't working out for that particular target audience. And that's because you were paying everyone a fair wage. You weren't doing what other fashion brands were doing in terms of like outsourcing to other countries or underpaying or having child labor. So what are some lessons you learned from having amazing marketing, having an amazing following, people offering you awards and recognition, but that not translating into bringing in revenue in your business?
I think that, you know, what's happening in marketing has shifted even from then, right? So if I go back to that era of marketing, small business owners could go to Instagram and in the beginning of the era, this is before TikTok really took a stronghold of people's attention. You could go to Instagram and you could interact with a brand, with a business owner, and that there was a direct line. And then that got saturated, I think, by a shift to trying to, particularly for large corporations, to leverage the notion of influencers, like embodied, you know, billboards for companies that could afford to pay them $1,500, $2,500 for a post. And for us as a small brand who was prioritizing living wages, we couldn't compete. There was no competing in that way. So I was able to raise about $500,000 to experiment with product design and with workforce development, but I needed another $250,000 very easily to be able to enter into from a way of reach, like targeted reach, people who shared our values, shared our design aesthetic, and could afford what we were offering. And so that, you know, one of the things I learned is marketing takes it's so much testing, you know, like it's so much experimentation, and experimentation is expensive. And so that was a challenge for us as a small brand to break through the noise. And I think the recognition was certainly helpful. It probably helped us to survive for the full 8 years that we pursued that project, always paying a living wage, always employing, you know, women, people who were just marginalized in different ways, whether they were trans or gender non-binary or formerly incarcerated. So we were able to create a really beautiful community in that way internally and tell that story. I write about it, like, what does it mean to be ethical in your storytelling? You know, not exploiting people's stories, not pushing them past points of comfort with what they disclose, not taxing them with needing to in any way perform what has happened to them, which has sometimes been very hard. So, you know, learning from a marketing perspective, how do you center people and honor them without you know, somehow making your audience a voyeur to the challenges of what life has given them. So learned a lot about that, how to be tender with communication. But ultimately, you know, small brands really need like an aggressive marketing strategy. You need a persistent marketing strategy, and you need to figure out how to hold that balance of taking care of your people and then figuring out that boost, that reach plan. So yeah, I've always been able to, I was a teacher. And I think that that's one of those superpowers that teachers in general, I don't think understand their superpower. Our society doesn't reward those superpowers. So teachers sleep on what it means to be able to capture a room of 50 14-year-olds for 90 minutes. Right. And that right there, that was an incredible playground for me to figure out how to know who in that room of 50 was listening, who was using profanity, who was on their phones, who was trying to, you know, it taught me a lot about how to hold a lot at one time. And so I think that really helped me in the storytelling bit. You know, how do you teach about complicated issues? How do you honor your team? And then how do you try to make all of that digestible and sexy? I mean, it's not a light lift. It was not a light lift to balance that whole. Did
you do all that marketing yourself, or did you hire an agency?
No agency.
Oh wow, you should
never
an
agency.
No, that's amazing.
Yeah, no, never had a marketing agency. I think in total in that 8 years in the marketing spend, I think on the final count we might have spent maybe $4,200 on marketing.
Wow, I mean, again, I've known about you before we even had a chance to meet. And like, I've been behind the scenes working things, and I was like, for example, I was on a group of people that were trying to figure out who should win this award. And I was like, I don't know her, but I think she should win. Like, she seems like she's already winning, so that's amazing.
Thank you for that. I would say that, and I would say that, and we decided, the team and I made the executive decision as CEO to sunset that project in summer of 2025. Mm-hmm. And that brought a lot of grief, which I think is a thing that we as entrepreneurs don't talk about, how sometimes the projects can just, things just don't work out the way that you want them to. Yeah. An investment doesn't work out the way you want it to. The timing doesn't work out the way you want it to. And all of those are kind of micro moments of grief. But sunsetting it, making the decision that, we just didn't have the resources to be able to do it the way that it needed to be done. Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of businesses push on even when they can't pay their employees a living wage. And that's normalized, like that it doesn't matter that your team can't eat. And that was not something that I was comfortable moving forward with. So, it came to the cliff's edge where I was like, I wanted to raise wages. And we knew that would be a test of what we'd be able to do as a company. And we walked to that edge together. Yeah. And we changed the brand, tried to do a rebrand, learned about repositioning. And then with the climate, I think in the country and just in the world, we just couldn't get the momentum to really make that successful. And so, I was like, okay, we've done everything that we can do, and I will teach about these lessons around the world moving forward, so that the data isn't lost.
Well, speaking of data, Kristina, what would you have recommended to Dr. Kimberly, considering she's doing it all herself right now, in terms of making sure there's a connection between the product and the target audience, and how she's positioning herself, if you could offer her?
You mean looking back?
Yes, looking back.
Looking back, I mean, there's a lot of market research that has to be done before you start a project. And I think that many of the entrepreneurs these days are learning that the hard way. Mm-hmm. And I think that it speaks volumes to the community that you've set up for yourself, the storytelling that you're able to offer through your experience, and also the fact that you had raised over $500,000 with just a smaller investment. So that does speak volumes. If there were advice that I would have given, I think that there would have been opportunities for more connections, more partnerships that would have helped you to acquire the group of people that were going to help you to obtain the resources that you were looking for in that moment. Other than that, I do think that it's phenomenal, and I would love to learn more about how you acquired that $500,000 and what use you did with that $4,200, because it speaks volumes to also the climate that we're in economically. That there's a lot of business owners that they're entrepreneurs at heart. They want to continue their business. They want to make sure that their business is on par with these, larger companies that we're up against as smaller businesses, and to go into a little bit of that would be very helpful for the audience.
I will say the book gives us all the clues on how to fundraise, so I definitely recommend the book for business owners.
Yeah. I think that the $500,000 came over the course of that 8 years, so it's a total $500,000, and the first $250,000 came in the first 6 years. So it was, that total is all, that was grants.
Okay.
That was not even like the total loan of like, okay, we took out a loan, we did take out a small business loan, and that was really helpful. It was in a moment where small business loans we got a 0% small business loan for $65,000. So that was
through the SBA?
No, that was through a community finance group, which is another one of those like micro cheat codes. Yeah. And I also think that, everything that I think is in the book by way of like exploring the options is helpful. But the landscape that we live in, both as consumers, producers, as small business owners, has shifted so significantly in 6 years. And I think that we have to start trying to make decisions where we're anticipating what's going to come in the next 4. So I think as much as it's helpful to understand the landscape that we inherit, I think it's also very important that we leverage that analysis to figure out how we're going to calculate for what we are facing. And those are two very different landscapes. So in 2020, after the murder of George Floyd and the pushback around how are we going to create a more just and fair and functional society, like when we talk about just and fair, I think we oftentimes forget that that's moving us all towards actual function, right? Like, how do we make sure that all of us have enough to live and to eat? How do we all, get access to the capital that we need to experiment? particularly when it comes to creating more just business models, that required, and I made this case for years, that required an investment from universities, from nonprofit groups, from foundations, from private family funds. So I think that, in that way, I was able to make a really clear case in a moment where there was a perked up ear that these are the kinds of considerations that we would all need to make if we were going to right the ship of our economy. And I think that, by 2024, I think we got really doused with a lot of negativity, a lot of suspicion on one side, a lot of, bad actors from abroad trying to kind of corrupt and control how we were thinking about change. We lost that momentum, and we lost it to a force that was following a very extractive worldview. And so now we have to figure out, how do we navigate that extractive worldview without surrendering to what it encourages us and incentivizes us to do. And so that's how my lens has kind of shifted in that way. We were able to get a $250,000 from the city of Philadelphia to push forward some really radical workforce development initiatives and innovations around creative economy and what it would take to experiment with working with halfway houses, working with women, nonprofits who are supporting women coming home from prison, and creating a soft landing space for that community. And that took a lot of radical care and a lot of radical trust from the city of Philadelphia in me as a leader and my team as a leadership team to be able to build those bridges and to hold people in such really tough transitions. And that was really helpful to just that sense of like, what does it mean to be in that B Corp social good, social entrepreneurship space as a way of trying to drive meaningful rebalancing of how we think about what business has the potential to be used for.
I think it's also really important that you've created that community, and community is like where everybody's going these days. 5 years ago, it was a very different place that we lived in where you could actually reach out to different companies and create new community. Now everybody's kind of sticking to their guns, sticking to what they know. Do you see that as well in the climate?
I see now that I think people are feeling a lot of two things that we're going to have to figure out how to medicate from a marketing perspective. A lot of collective despair. So what does it mean when you look at the state of the planet, you look at the state of the economy, you look at the state of the political apparatus, and you can't see how things improve? So how are we acknowledging that, right? How are we signaling that we acknowledge that? How are we, and for those of us who are seeking to hold a sense of bond and trust with our audiences, we're going to have to figure out how to hold space for that and still try to offer something that feels medicinal by way of either like straight up pure life need or aspirational in terms of, that emotional core. And I do think that what's on the horizon, I suspect, is some rejection of like tech writ large, where it's like, I'm not really trying to be on my phone. I don't trust what I'm seeing. I don't believe that it's true, or I'm being, just inundated with negativity and horror and harm. And in that way, I think we're going to see a shift to people who are looking for an analog connection, right? So we talk about community as like, I think for a lot of us, we're conditioned to think community is a noun, but I think we're going to see a shift of us understanding, even from a marketing perspective, that community is a verb. And that in that way is because it's what we do, we have to figure out how do we create offerings that are enticing but not exhausting in a time when people already feel, just like strained, right?
Yeah, the technology is definitely taking things for a left turn. I think that AI being in the mix, while it's wonderful and we can cut out a lot of the processes and thinking that we once had, it's also extremely important to be wise and careful with AI because it's actually producing disconnect in our own minds, disconnect in the community. The verb analogy was great. I think it's extremely important for all of us to be creating community ourselves, and that requires action. And with the technology that's out there, it's just distracting us. So we could lay in bed all day and watch TV, or we could watch our phones and doom scroll. We could listen to what AI, create relationships with AI. There are stories out there where it's really taking a mental toll on a lot of really important people. And I mean, people in general just need to feel the importance that they're worth, and technology is kind of straining that experience.
And that's going to be challenging for marketing. Particularly as I think for those of us who are selling a product or trying to reach an audience, we are under a lot of pressure to give them more, to talk to them more often. You know, it used to be that one email a day was enough or one email a week was enough. Mm-hmm. And now it's like, you know, there are some brands, I think Skim's sending 5 emails a day, right? So when you're, when you're trying to be seen in someone's inbox and the competitor is throwing 5 emails at them, that's just one form of communication. We're gonna have to be really clever and very judicious about what we say, when we say it, how we say it, and making sure that we protect the trust by not being invasive, right? Because I think AI is leading us to being like our own internal invasive species, and that's like wild.
Yeah,
it is.
Yeah.
So you talked a little bit about, in my own words, my interpretation is that how important it is to protect stories of people that are sharing it with you, while still like introducing new things into the world. And in a way, I do that in my art practice. In addition to running Creative Repute, I'm a muralist. So I go into communities and I talk to people, and they share stories with me. And I want to make sure that the mural is reflective of this particular community, but also offer something new into the world. But they're sharing information with me that makes them vulnerable. Like, where's the cutoff point? So I think what you're saying in that sense really resonates with me when it comes to storytelling. I also just want to go back a little bit. You talked a little bit about needing more capital, and in a way that's why you decided to disassemble Grant Blvd. Money oftentimes adds fuel to the fire. And so I'm curious, if you were to go back, do you wish that you took a slow growth approach where you're just, as you bring in more revenue, then you're using that to grow the business? Or do you feel as though really if you just had more funding, that was the key to success?
I actually think we were on a pretty slow growth rate. I mean, I think that, you know, what people see in terms of the perception of things is one thing. And then there's like, what are you observing? What are you working towards internally? And I think in a lot of ways, what we were doing was so unusual in fashion for all of the reasons. We were producing about 95% of what we were selling in our brick and mortar stores and online in Philadelphia. And we were doing it was all handmade, it was very, in that way, it was like, it wasn't so much that it was like laborious, it was just handcrafted. And I think that approach to craft is invariably kind of slow. And I think that we were also trying to, you know, experiment with our approach and with fabric and with design and with size inclusivity, and we were just really trying to be very thoughtful. Yeah. And I think that money is actually really important to being able to tell the story, because, you know, if you're producing something beautiful and no one knows, and it's a beautiful thing that sits in a room. So, you know, in an era where there are so many companies that have, because they're not paying wages, all that they are really doing is they're taking capital, and all of it really goes to the CEO, the C-suite gets fed very well, and then the rest of it, for the most part, goes just to marketing. Marketing is one of their biggest spends. It's not materials, it's not even shipping costs, it's not a story of tariffs. It's just storytelling. What they're really selling ultimately is the story. Right. The product doesn't have a real substantial cost to it. So when what they're really selling is the marketing plan, then we as small brands can't compete with that unless we have a marketing spend. And the other thing that we end up having to do, which is just, it creates community, but it is also taxing, is you have to go to a hand-to-hand combat style in terms of your tactical approach, which means you have to be in markets, you have to be doing pop-ups, you have to be doing in-person activations. So you're growing rich, you know, stickiness with the people who do interact with you. They love you. They get a chance to actually fall into some sense of love and loyalty to you. But the customer acquisition cost is so high that you can't really, you know, put fuel to that without enough capital to just straight up feed the machine. Yeah. And so I do think that it was both. And I also think too that when it comes to particularly to women-led companies, particularly Black women-led companies, there's such a divestment into what we're doing, such a disbelief that we end up having to work so much harder to constantly prove that what we're doing is on par with industry, that ultimately what ends up happening, I think, pretty persistently, is we actually produce products that far exceed market, but then because we don't have a marketing spin, no one even knows about them. You know, so I think that yes, money in that way, capital in that way, that's offered for just like unrestricted spending, which is mostly operations, is central to being able to just breathe, right?
Yeah.
I think for so many small business owners, we never even get to the point where we can pull anything above our noses out of the water of like the landscape that we're trying to navigate. And capital gives you team, which gives you support, which gives you the opportunity to delegate, which gives you the opportunity to think and to imagine and to solve with ease. And I think that ultimately that's where business leaders, that's where you really thrive.
For
right?
sure. Yeah.
Do you have a project in mind, but you're just not sure where to begin with budget, scope, or next steps? We created a cost calculator to help new clients get a clear starting point before reaching out. Whether you're thinking about branding, website support, design, marketing, content, advertising, campaign management, or a larger creative project, the calculator gives you a simple way to explore what your project might need. It's not about forcing you into a package, it's about helping you understand the level of support, planning, and investment that might be involved in your project, so the conversation can start with more clarity. Visit studio.creativerepute.com. Start there, explore your options, and take the next step toward building something with intention.
Well, speaking of a little bit of timing, what year did you start Grant Blvd?
In 2017.
So that was 2 years right before the pandemic started. 3 years. Do you feel as though the pandemic, in a way, contributed to how you were positioned in the world? Can you talk a little bit about that?
I mean, one thing it did was when I started Grant Blvd, I was still in a full-time teaching practice. I think there are a lot of us as small business owners who knows what it's like to be holding down a full-time job and then, trying to work in the business plan and the margins of your decision-making of your life. And what the pandemic did in that quick push to being fully online, we were all in, that the throes of that Zoom culture, was it meant that I could, get into my classroom early in the morning and I could have a meeting with someone who was in London, and then school could start and I could be in my teaching period, and then I could go to prep and I could have a meeting with someone in New York, and then I could stay late into the day in my classroom, and then in the evening be in a call with someone in California.
You're working hard.
I was working hard.
Yes.
Yeah, I was working, and I think that's what the pandemic, in some ways, it gave me a different kind of reach.
So you're very intentional about making the world a better place. And something I've learned from Martin Luther King is that time isn't neutral. A lot of people are saying, things will just get better, and they're like waiting out certain things, but you have to be active about pushing the dial in the direction you want the world to go in. And that's something that I see you doing. Can you talk a little bit about the times we're in right now? Because you mentioned people feel like a strong sense of despair with the political climate, things happening in the world. And self-care is very important. I feel like self-care is what the Leader's Workbook is about. So can you give us some sense of your interpretation of what's happening now and just some advice in general that you can offer?
I think, as I've been traveling the nation in the last year on that first book tour, one thing that is true is that it's a persistent experience. So what no matter where you are right now, I'm very confident that your experience is shared by other people, particularly people who have a little bit of what I think I like to call porosity, where it's like you can feel other people, you can feel the sadness, you see suffering and it affects you, and that way your spirit is still very much so intact. And I think for those of us who are navigating the now with any degree of heart softening and any degree of porosity, that this is an exhausting time.
Yeah.
And I remind people that two things are true, and one we have to really lean into. The first one is that in the larger arc of human existence, there's always been suffering. So this is not new. There's always been tyrannical leaders. There's always been violence at scale. That is not new. The second thing is that in that arc, there have always been people who align their time, their talents, their treasure with what it meant to serve the common good. It's always been true. And then the third thing that we have to also remember is that, the way that they were able to do that was because they continued to protect their optimism. That it wasn't so much that this would pass, but that it was possible that better was on the horizon, which are two very different position points. And for people who are protecting their optimism, what that means is that they are protected from apathy, which is what sometimes when you're like, this too shall pass, that can lean you into like being like, I can go in neutral, or I can go in hibernation, or I can be an ostrich and allow the fixing to be on other people. And so optimism is a position of, I actually am rooting for something better, and that's what I'm contributing my energy towards. Even as I pursue self-preservation and what's required of self-preservation. So this is like the work of real adults. This is a sober and mature approach to how do you live in tumultuous times. And for me, I'm reminded that I know for a fact that in this country, for 400 years, people survived when they couldn't guarantee that their children would be their own, that their kids, their babies might be taken from them and they might be forced to feed another baby, that their husbands couldn't protect them because their marriage was not recognized, that they couldn't defend themselves in court because they were denied the right to learn to read and write, and that their physical bodies were always at the access point of whoever physically owned them, including all of their entire experience, their entire bodies, right? So when I put that in perspective, I'm like, I know for a fact that for centuries, people survive far worse than this. And so, I also am like, as we think about our exhaustion and our fatigue, I'm like, guys, this ain't that bad. Mm-hmm. If we don't do things with a real sense of commitment, then history will repeat itself. And what that looks like will be held in the imagination of bad actors. So we have to be the good actors, and we have to imagine positive things, positive futures.
For sure. Yeah, the arc of human progress is getting better. So protecting optimism has been getting better, but it still requires work. We can't just wait.
No, and particularly now, we really can't wait, because the world that we are inheriting, the one that we're living in right now, is troubled by things that were not things before, right? We talk about let's talk about the natural world just really quickly. As we see the growth of AI, right? We talked about that if we return back into that conversation loop. What's required energetically to sustain that level of output is fresh water. And fresh water is used to cool those massive data centers because there isn't another energetic option right now, and not for the foreseeable future. Fresh water is a finite resource. So this sense of urgency to really think about how we're speaking up, how we're standing up, how we're acting with what I like to call moral courage is actually, it's going to be dependent on our ability to survive as a species, right? Right now we enjoy, in this country, potable, clean water. I imagine that that's going to be something that will be very expensive for us in the very short term. So we really actually do have to act with a sense of urgency around things like that. So there are some very particular issues that we don't have days or weeks or months to wait to see how it plays out, because the architecture that's being designed now, it will completely remove our capacity to speak up.
Yeah, I think a lot of people don't realize how much water AI is using, and I certainly did not realize it, but then I actually saw a video putting more texture to it. One of my favorite authors is Octavia Butler, in Parable of the Sower and Parable of the Talents, talks about the future, and she was just so aware of what was happening in the past that she can recognize patterns, and one of it is just us running out of fresh water, and space travel. She talks a little bit about that, just returning to your community, growing your own food. I think that's really interesting. I was also I'm not a fan of him at all, but I was listening to a clip of Elon, just came up in my feed, and he's also talking about moving the data centers into space and how much resources that would take up. So we're in an interesting time right now.
Yeah, and I think part of it,
fast.
Things are moving fast, and I think part of it is because so much of us are feeling so inundated with information.
Yeah, there's a lot of information
that we can't figure out what our own individual front line is. And so what I encourage people to do, what I'm going to encourage the listening audience to do, is to discover your own front line. And while you are, hearing all of this information and staying abreast of all the horrors, station yourself in a place where you will persistently take action. For some of us, it'll be in schools because we are teachers. For some of us, it'll be in science because that's what calls us. For some of us, it'll be with animals. We have to discover in all of this chaos who are the people and the places that will be ours, and we have to be married to that sense of like focused action. Because I think when we try to take on a variety of things, we dilute our impact, and we really impede our own energetic management. And so it's like, what's your thing? What's your thing? Where's that thing that really hurts you? Where's that thing that really pains you? Where's that suffering in the world that brings you to tears, right? And go there. That, I think sometimes the sorrow that we feel is a signal that that's where we should show our solidarity in the most radical ways. And so we have to really be brave about going towards the fire.
Yeah, I think some people need tools though for how to find their thing, how to protect their optimism. And I think your new book honestly serves as a tool more so than a book. Can you show us your new book? So
this beautiful little piece of work of art.
So Creative Repute designed the cover and formatted the pages. Yeah. Can you give the audience a summary of what this book is about?
Yeah, so when I was
how many pages is it?
The final copy is 382.
Massive.
And, it is a massive work because the work of being a leader is massive. And for all of us, I think, in our K through 12 experience particularly, there really is an absence of explicit instruction on what it means to be a leader and the sacred responsibility of leadership. We're told to aspire to degrees and to go after titles, and that would somehow make us important and powerful, but no one really tells us about the sacred work of that responsibility and the deeply personal nature of what it means to be and to live a life that is committed to service. So the leader's work it comes. I wrote it after Build It Boldly, but in some ways it's like a prelude to it. And that Build It Boldly is like, okay, I've examined my life and I know my front line and I need tools for how to design the thing. And the leader's work is about the design of your own inner architecture so that you can face the hard things and the trauma of your childhood, and that you can learn about the practices that keep us sturdy in a storm. So it's rooted in 12 pillars, moving from silence and solitude and being still, the things that, few of us are ever taught to do comfortably. And then moving into what are you planting in your life? What is that you have to weed to make space for that planting? And how are you aligning what you create with that, that mission of serving humanity? So it's meant to be like a month by month, week by week. Where are you winning? Where are you losing? And then a really subtle reading list of people like Octavia Butler, who I'm also I've leaned into her worldview and her just like ability to just envision futures, her futurism. Yeah. So it's a gentle kind of ode to all of the people who have inspired the way I think about meeting my own full potential, and the people I've introduced my students to over the course of my professional career to help them, kind of navigate, what leadership demands.
And what's your website? Where can people find some of the things you're producing?
Yeah, so the newest company, in the compost of Grant Blvd is Build It Boldly. And Build It Boldly is a media and leadership development company that's really interested in what it means to be moral in leadership. So, I think one of the places where I think there's a massive gap in our culture in this moment is with precision of language around, what it means to be moral and the beauties of morality and the challenges of being moral, and how do we, examine our own lives with that in mind. So you'll go to www.builditboldly.com and you'll find these tools and other tools that I'm, kind of constantly designing with that thinking about, what's possible for us all. So yeah, you go to the website and get all the things.
You also have some t-shirts on there.
Yeah, I'm not really actually interested in the notion of fashion per se, but I am really interested in what it means to design wearables. And so one of the wearables says protect your optimism, and it sits on the back of the shirt. So it's as much for the person who's wearing it as it is for the person who's standing in line behind you, and a way of offering some positive reminders to other people about the larger work of this moment. So those are, all, printed in ways and working with companies that share my values. And so we're still being really judicious about, not giving into, toxic, business practices.
And that's the yarrow plant on it?
Yeah, it has the yarrow plant on it, which is one of the symbols of how I think about, I don't know, like making the best of hard times. The yarrow is a plant that appears all across North America, and it's a species that is the first to come to sprout after a fire. So it signals to an environment that has been really significantly damaged that there's still something possible here. And so I use that plant as a way of helping other people understand that, we have to focus our lens on seeing possibility. And I see that in nature all the time.
Yeah, you're very intentional about everything that you do. To wrap it up, can you tell us a little bit about what's next for you? I know you like gardening. Yarrow plant is inspiration, returning to nature, you talked a little bit about. So where do you see yourself going next in the future? You talked a little bit about it, but I want to be very direct.
I see myself, a way I'm framing it is just teaching at scale. I was a classroom teacher for 20 years, and I left that practice to, move into social entrepreneurship, and now I realize like it's really actually like an assignment that's probably been with me since I was a little girl. And so I'm looking forward to moving back to that teaching practice and designing tools that help people, whether they're in 8th grade or they're 70 and thinking about reimagining their lives, with aligning their work with how to serve humanity. And so that'll look like new books. I'm working on a collection of essays that I'm really excited about. And I'm writing a column now for Philly Mag called Dear Kimberly, which is in the advice kind of space, so soft wisdom for times like this. And I'm looking forward to being around, just like traveling the world and teaching. Yeah. Saying yes to
where are you going next?
Where am I going next? Next, I will be in Denver, Colorado for Outside Magazine has a massive music festival. So I'll be there actually leading a workshop for, I think it's 400 people on the leader's work. So yeah.
When is that?
That's the last week in May in Denver, Colorado. Cage the Elephant is like one of the opening acts for those of y'all who love them. They've got some big musical acts, and I come like the day before the full festival starts to work with mostly entrepreneurs, people in business, and I'm just, it's all about, what does it mean to hear yourself, to know yourself, and to align your life with really meeting your own full potential and serving something that matters to you right now. So just helping people cultivate the space in a time as noisy as this to do what I think creates a lot of peace and joy and a deeper sense of purpose, which I think in these times is what we need more than ever.
When you're talking about the noise and that everything that we're dealing with in this current landscape that is the world, what would be your encouragement to help people gain that peace, other than going through the workbook themselves, which is extremely important for you to get into, for sure?
Yeah. I think that one thing that's been really helpful to me is to remember that my life is actually very short and very small, and that in honor of that, I have to really protect a posture of trying to figure out how to dedicate my energy to things that will be beneficial to other people, which, some of the people I admire the most, they planted the seeds of trees that they never sat under. And I think as we think about our lives as being small and short, that we don't squander it in the YOLO of like wastefulness, that we instead hold it, make it sacred, and that we really try to figure out how to live a life that's surrendered to persistent service. And I found so much joy, and I found so much meaningful connection, and I felt so honored in the spaces that I've been in, including being with you, through that pursuit. So I want more people to discover the power of making that choice and the freedom that comes from that, and to calibrate their lives to that pursuit of really just like showing up.
That makes a lot of sense. The steps that we put forward today are the inspiration for tomorrow's future.
Yeah. And just speaking of life being short, I'm so grateful to be alive at this time and to be located in a similar city as you, in a similar time in our timeline of human history. Your inspiration, and I'm really grateful that you came to join us today on our podcast.
It's been
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for your time today.
You're so welcome. So welcome.
All right, y'all.
As always, thank you so much for listening to Creative Repute's Up. If this conversation gave you something to think about, share it with a colleague, friend, or a community partner who would appreciate it too. You can learn more about Creative Repute, explore our work, and read related stories at creativerepute.com. Subscribe, follow, and stay connected for more conversations on creativity, strategy, leadership, and impact. Until next time, keep building with purpose.